My name is Elizabeth. I am a rising junior at Wellesley College, and for the summer, am an intern with the Make Polluters Pay campaign. I'm really grateful to have been invited, and so thank you for taking the time to listen to me. I am just a little bit about me. I moved to Massachusetts for college because I was really impressed by the city. I really love the city, but also the really forward-looking climate action that has been done in the greater Boston area. And of course, there's such a density of colleges here that it seemed like the natural choice. I'm originally a background of having grown up in North Carolina, and so I was around nature for most of my life. I learned to love being outdoors and also kind of questioning a lot of my family didn't raise me in one particular religion. And so I was just led by a natural curiosity. And then I moved to Arizona, and that was a big change biome wise. But I was also kind of struck by how different the infrastructure and the willingness to invest in solar in the sunniest state in the nation in particular was. And so that kind of led me to get involved in climate activism at a young age when I was in high school, trying to expand access to solar panels in Arizona. And I've been, after moving here to Massachusetts, seeing a lot of parallels between what stopped a lot of the solar panel work there and a lot of the pushback against make polluters pay here, especially from industries and corporate interests in particular. A little bit also about that story is that I joined a UU congregation in Arizona, and that really grounded me in a lot of my activism that I was doing. And after talking to a lot of Olivier, who you may know, who was a fellow of Better Future Project and also a Quaker Service Fellow, after talking to them and some of my friends at Wellesley, a close friend of mine who is also a Quaker, I've really grown to appreciate these faith communities that have a really strong tie to social justice historically and yeah, in the present moment. So again, really excited, and I am going to go ahead and get started in sharing about this campaign. So Make Polluters Pay Massachusetts was started about 2 years ago, launched then, and really is part of a national movement to hold fossil fuel corporations accountable for the damages that they've done. And of course, there's a lot that have been done in the state. So what I'm going to talk about is what exactly climate damages the bill, the bill of how much damages are costing our communities, the role and moral responsibility of fossil fuel corporations in those climate disasters and the damages that those disasters have caused, and then the Make Polluters Pay campaign and the movement to make fossil fuel corporations pay for these damages. So, as we all probably know and have felt, climate impacts are worsening globally and specifically in the Northeast as well. You can look to the LA fires. Sarah, I know you're out there in California and you've probably experienced a lot of the wildfires that have been happening, but you can also look to the Texas floods. And of course, you don't really have to look far. Right here in Massachusetts, we have seen so many devastating floods, and the Canadian wildfires just this summer, coupled with the extreme heat, was just really miserable for a lot of people. And I know especially disadvantaged communities have really been dealing with that yeah, it's been pretty devastating for them. So a lot of these climate disasters and extreme weather events cost a lot. And as extreme weather rises in the United States, particularly, the expenses from these events are rising as well. So just for a national example, and to give you a sense of scope, the NOAA in the 1980s was recording about $1 billion disaster a year. And then flash forward to 2024, and just in that year alone, they recorded $27 billion disasters. And that resulted in over $180 billion in damages. Here's a graph that shows you the exponential nature of this. Also, a side note, and the NOAA was told to stop tracking billion-dollar disasters by the Trump administration at the request of fossil fuel companies. But that is why 2024 is the last year that we have actual good data on this. But yeah, you can just see the exponential nature of that. So Massachusetts is obviously not excluded from this. Recent reports, such as the one that came out earlier this year, basically saying that just climate adaptation is going to cost 8 big digs. I wasn't really alive for that, but if anybody remembers, that is, a huge expense. And so it would cost 90 to $120 billion just to implement adaptation measures. And that isn't including the transit upgrades that are needed to the MBTA, which is projected around $10 billion. And then also just for Boston's coastline, the Army Corps of Engineers proposed a $10 billion flood plan. And all of this is, again, just for adaptation. This isn't taking into effect the extreme weather and extreme storms that we know are going to happen because of climate change and the damages from rebuilding from these storms that we're going to have to pay, as well as the loss in GDP because of these events. So we're already facing down a pretty big bill, and we're already paying part of that bill. And that is through the local level. So town and cities are having to drain their budgets in order to adequately respond to extreme weather that hurts small businesses, that causes individuals to pay higher insurance prices, the premiums go up, higher taxes, and also, of course, just that cost of rebuilding, particularly, for example, a local example in the Worcester and Hampton counties, they faced pretty bad floods in late 2023, and this totaled over $39 million. And FEMA usually is the agency that is supposed to step in and help states fund this, but they decided to deny this funding. And the state actually had to step in to help these municipalities, which is a big problem and a problem that we're going to be seeing more and more because Massachusetts towns and cities only have really $5,000 on hand for these disaster and damage costs. And so that when these do happen, which we're seeing happen more and more, this drains their budgets, it hikes up prices, and yeah, generally is making things more unaffordable. And we also know that there are more invisible costs of the climate crisis to our economy, which drives up the current affordability crisis that we're seeing right now. I'm sure we can all relate to paying higher prices and higher taxes. And so a large part of that is because of the climate crisis and the devastation that it is causing to local agriculture, local infrastructure, local town and city budgets. So we are all paying this right now, but the Make Polluters Pay campaign is kind of posing the question, who should be paying? And our answer is those most responsible. So we all know that the climate crisis, hopefully we all agree too, that it is caused mostly by the burning of fossil fuels and the releasing of greenhouse gas into the atmosphere. And the fossil fuel industry likes to kind of say, like, we all use fossil fuels. And so the burden is on all of us. And that is a common narrative that they use to try to get us to bear the responsibility. But really, they are the ones who are the most responsible for this crisis. And that is because they undertook a systemic campaign of denying climate science, suppressing climate science through funding denialism, and generally slow walking any attempt at transitioning us to an alternative clean energy. And so they are really the architects of the world that we're seeing, the fossil fuel addiction that we have in our global society. And they knew even back in the 1970s what this was going to do. And so you probably have heard of a lot of the lawsuits that are going on, particularly targeting these companies. And there's also a Supreme Court case that is being brought later this year to talk about local municipalities and states' abilities to do this, to sue them. And the Make Polluters Pay campaign nationally is involved in those initiatives. And also there's this legislative avenue that we have that can directly bring these funds into our communities through this kind of super fund method, which I will talk about. So the Make Polluters Pay campaign in Massachusetts is a coalition of climate activists, again, launched around 2 years ago and is putting through this legislation to establish a climate change super fund. And just quickly, super fund, you might have heard, a company spills oil into a river, they have to pay to clean it up. And so it's grounded in that kind of federal precedent of the super fund. And also the simple principle that if you've made this mess, if you've created this architecture for the global system to be addicted to fossil fuels, you should clean up the damages that come from those fossil fuels being burned. So how the legislation is currently written, the one that was most recently introduced in the past legislative session in the Massachusetts legislature, would basically, there is a robust science called climate attribution science. And so that can calculate, well, sorry, that's the second step. So the first step is just what are the costs from 1992 to 2024? How much has climate change cost the state? And then the second step is bringing in that climate attribution science and determining which of the largest fossil fuel corporations who are the most responsible, what proportion they should pay of that cost. And then third would be requiring those oil, gas, coal companies to pay into this fund, and those funds would be dispersed for climate resiliency and adaptation programs. So across the United States, this has been a growing movement. We've already seen climate superfund bills pass in New York and Vermont. Vermont was the first one, they get the credit. And I can talk to a little bit about the legal challenges that have arisen from that, but that has not slowed down any other states and movements from pushing through these legislative efforts. So you can see Oregon, Maine, Maryland, California, yeah, even Hawaii. So in Massachusetts, we've done some economic analysis, and after these oil and gas and coal, these fossil fuel companies would be required to pay their fair share. This would bring in, over a period of 25 years, about $1 billion annually. These are conservative estimates, by the way, about $1 billion annually into the state economy. For every billion, this would create about 7,600 jobs. And these jobs would be building public infrastructure, implementing nature-based solutions, doing energy retrofits and upgrades, funding preventative healthcare programs. So a lot of where this money would go, because we've also received questions about this, would be to projects that are advised by key stakeholders in this process, including labor and frontline communities, especially environmental justice communities. And the bill has been written so that 40% of these projects are prioritized for environmental justice communities in our state. So this is our coalition right now. We would love to include friends meetings and leaders to this count, but you can already see that it is a very broad and diverse group of people across our state who have been called by this campaign to take action. And so since the launch, what have we kind of been up to? The campaign has really built a lot of grassroots momentum, organizing and mobilizing communities across the state, college students, youth leaders, community leaders to come together, take action in the state house, gather testimony. And so that has been a large part of their work. Also, it has been a lot of grass tops movement, so getting key co-sponsorships and endorsements from our federal representatives in Massachusetts. And that has also included municipal resolutions, which I know Bill was part of the Brookline Municipal Resolution. And of all the municipalities that have resolved to support Make Polluters Pay, they represent about a fifth of the state's population. And so we're really showing a lot of momentum when it comes to demonstrating that this is popular in Massachusetts. So what are we going to do now? The Make Polluters Pay campaign, it has been reorienting after the last legislative session, and I can talk to that more as well. But our plan to win for this next legislative session is to harness this momentum that has been brought on by the grassroots power, keep going with the grass chops support with municipal resolutions, and making sure that key officials, Governor Healy, the Attorney General, are like on the record as being supportive of this campaign, and really shifting the landscape so that no longer can our legislators kind of delay this action, but really give them a clear choice of, are you going to protect residents? Are you going to fund projects that are going to make life more affordable for residents of Massachusetts? Or are you going to delay, prevent, stand on the side really of the largest fossil fuel corporations? And so really our plan is to make this choice clear and stark for those in power, and to empower those who are in our communities to advocate in support of this. So what can you do to join this campaign? I know that Bill has mentioned that this will be like taken to the larger meeting, and I'm happy to answer any questions as y'all are considering doing that. There is also part of why we are coming to faith communities is to ask them to sign on to an interfaith sign-on letter, because we know that faith leaders are so important in this work, especially when it comes to climate justice, and demonstrating that through faith, these community leaders are on board and know the effect that it has on their communities. And so that there is that sign-on there, that interfaith sign-on letter that will probably be brought needing to be brought before the entire meeting. And then there's also a petition that you can share individually. We would also love to have meeting members potentially join our grassroots coalition if you're interested in planning and getting involved more in the campaign. And we also have a couple webinars. For example, on September 30th, we'll be doing a spotlight training, which is really how to take direct action to ask legislators very clearly what their stances are on this issue. So those are some of those upcoming opportunities. But again, I'm happy to answer any questions, and I really hope that we can work together to make Massachusetts more livable and a better future for everyone. So thank you so much.